Hello fellow crafters and fellow artists. Today is another part of my watercolor series for beginners, and today we're going to talk about wet and wet washes. Things you may want to happen with a wet and wet wash, things you may not want to happen with a wet and wet wash. We're going to talk about the fluid control, and we're also going to talk about how colors blend together naturally within a wet and wet wash. And you're going to learn a lot about color theory working with wet and wet washes. You're going to see an example of where colors work nicely together in a wet and wet wash when they blend together, and how they create new colors when they do that, and how pretty that effect can be. But sometimes, and it depends on if that's the effect you want or don't want, but sometimes colors can blend together in such a way as you get a little bit of a muddy effect. The colors don't necessarily blend together in a pretty way. But if you're doing a painting where you want that desired shadowy dark effect, then that may be something you want to consider. So if I layer this color over this color and it bleeds together with that color, then I get this nice shadowy effect here. So that may be what you want. Wet and wet wash can also give you a nice graded sky effect. And then it can just give you a beautiful watercolory, painterly, abstract effect. You know, for a background, maybe you just want your background to kind of fuzz out and go away, you know, just to lead the eye through the painting, so to speak. So anyway, that's what we're going to discuss today, is wet and wet washes, and let's go ahead and get started. Okay, today as usual I'm starting with an assortment of watercolor brushes. Don't know exactly what sizes I'm going to use yet, but I've got some 1 inch, 3/4 inch, 1/2 inch flat brushes, a various assortment of round brushes, a mop brush. Anyway, I've got one jar that you can't see here, it's off camera, for rinsing, another jar for fresh clean water, of course my palette of paints. I've got a sponge here for kind of blotting my brushes on, to get excess water off from them. And let's see, anything else that you need to know about? Oh yes, as always, my dirty nasty towel for, again, blotting my brush off, and if necessary, picking up, you know, the edges of puddles of water. Working on a piece of 140-pound hot pressed Fabriano paper that I've stretched. That's why it's on this board with staples in it. From what I understand, from what I've read, when you're doing watercolor and you're working with paper that has a tendency to buckle, particularly a larger piece of paper that's going to have a lot more buckling, when you're working with a smaller piece of paper, it's going to buckle, but you're not working with as big of an area that the buckling is going to make a lot of difference. It's going to make a difference. But anyway, so I went ahead and followed the directions, and we will go over this in this watercolor series, the directions for stretching paper. But anyway, I went ahead and stretched this paper and got it ready for doing wet and wet washes. Not having buckling would definitely be ideal. So I'm going to start with my number 30 round brush, and this is a Mimic Squirrel brush by Creative Mark. And I'm going to get it wet, and again, just rolling the ferrule and handle on the sponge to release, I'm not sure what I'm trying to say, for it to sop up any extra moisture. And then I'm just going to go back in and just put the tip of the brush in the water bucket. And I'm going to wet, this is a 4 by 6 inch square, or rectangle rather. Oh, and there's a little pigment coming out. I must not have rinsed that brush well the last time I used it. But I'm going to wet the paper so that there's no puddles, but it is shiny wet. Shiny wet with no puddles is the key, from what I've read, to wet and wet washes. That's the best place to be for your paint to flow beautifully. So now I'm just going to choose a color. I think I'm going to my understanding, the reason you need to have a mastery of wet and wet washes is because they produce soft edges, no hard edges with wet and wet. They're going to produce soft edges, which is ideal for putting in skies, water, anything that you want to recede into the background that you don't want detailed, hard edges on. We're not creating detail with the wet and wet wash. We're creating fuzzy, obscure shapes. So let's see if we want to put a sky in, and this is phthalo blue with a green shade, and I'm just going to play a little bit here just to see how the paint moves. See how it starts bleeding and spreading out? That's what a wet and wet wash does. Oh, and I just rinsed my brush in my clean water. Okay, my paper is already starting to dry on me. And that's one thing I've noticed about this paper is it does dry really quick. So I do think I need to, when I start getting ready to compose pictures, and this, I can see where this would be great for card making, which is what I do a lot of, for stamping on, because it's a hot press, nice smooth surface. But I think when I get ready to start painting pictures, I'm going to need 100% cotton cold pressed paper for the best results. But this is fine for exercises, to start getting used to techniques and seeing how the colors work and so forth. So let me see, I'm going to pick up some sap green. And again, I'm just going to drop color in and watch it flow. I think I've got too much moisture. Didn't have enough at first, and now I have too much. And see how it's wanting to puddle here? So what I did was I just I rinsed my brush, blotted it off, wiped it really good with my towel to dry it as much as possible, and then just put the tip of it in the corner of that puddle of water. Because now what I have is a thirsty brush. And see, this paper has been stretched, but it's still buckling. I am having a difficult time with this Fabriano paper. It is 25% cotton, but I'm still having some trouble with moisture control with it. So what I'm going to do, since I have a spray bottle on hand and I use this to get my paints moist and flowing, I'm just going to squirt some of it onto my palette for my fresh clean water. And now I'm going to get some permanent gamboge. I just love that color. And I'm going to flow it in. Oop. Drop it in here with these other two colors. And this is a way, a wet and wet wash, if you want to somewhat mix colors together on your paper, have them mix together on their own more naturally, this is the way to do it with a wet and wet wash. Okay, I've got some clean fresh water again. And now I'm going to move on to my second 4x6 rectangle. And again, I'm going to wet it. Wet on wet washes is definitely something to master if you're somebody who likes to paint landscapes. I don't know yet if I'm someone who likes to paint landscapes, but I know I sure like looking at pictures of painted landscapes. So I'm thinking that's probably something I am going to enjoy, that and making flowers. So one of the things you can do with a wet and wet wash is do that muted, soft, fuzzy background that you see in landscape pictures where things just kind of recede back and are blurred out. I'm having some puddle issues right here. Ha ha ha, rinsed in the right bucket that time. I'm just picking up these puddles so they don't cause an issue in my second painting. But anyway, that is what I want to work on this second rectangle, is putting in, like, say, a sky. And I'll go back to my phthalo blue for that. And to put in a sky, from what I understand, you do it like a graded wash, or a gradient wash, however you prefer to say it. So we're going to start at the top. We're going to have the strongest color be at the top and then fade down to a lighter color. And the wet wash assists in that because the pigment will continue to move. And I'm going to take everything, I have all my buckets and everything resting on my board, but I'm going to go ahead and tilt it towards me. I'm going to rinse my brush, which I just did in my clean water again. And I'm going to assist that pigment in moving by tilting the board and by moving my brush back and forth. And have it fade down. And a wet and wet wash like this, where you get either a graded or a flat wash, which we could do wet and wet also, is lay in a ground for a painting. A ground is generally, again from what I've read, and I will get eventually to one of these videos, we'll talk about the book that I've been reading, but you lay in a ground as your like base color that's going to be underneath your painting, and it kind of glows through because watercolor is transparent. So whatever you lay on top of it, you're still going to see what's underneath it to a degree. So if you really want a warm, sunshiny painting, then you might put in a very light, pale yellow ground underneath your painting. So you're going to have that warmth and that sunshininess that comes through the rest of your colors and everything you paint on top of it. So here I just did, let me back this up so you can see again. Okay, so I just laid in a graded wash in a wet and wet technique, and after this dries, because this could be a ground also, and so after this dries, then I could put in a horizon line, and I could have this be ocean, water, lake, or I could go right on top of it, because this is a phthalo blue green shade, so I could go on top of this with some sap green and have this be my foreground. Now I'm not being very neat, I'm not really trying to be either, but so you can see that blue ground didn't affect the overall color of my foreground. It might have left it a little bit cool, so if I wanted to warm this up while this was still wet, I could drop, say, a little burnt umber into it to mimic earthiness, and that immediately warms it up a little bit. So there's a lot of uses for a wet on wet wash. And then if you just want to get crazy and really abstract, I'm just going to squirt this directly on since I've muddied up my clean water again. I've got to stop doing that, so I'm just going to move this around. But what you could do is I'm going to take this permanent gamboge again. Is do a flat wash. Again, this is like doing a ground. This is going to be basically my background color, but I'm not going to let it dry and start painting on top of it. While it's still nice and wet and juicy, I'm just going to start dropping other colors into it and just make an abstract piece of blooming art. Isn't that just beautiful? This is the beauty of watercolor right here, is its ability to shift and move and be able to be layered, and things underneath still be seen, and it's just a madness of loveliness. And I'm picking up a little quinacridone magenta, and again just dropping. And I'm going to pick up a little dioxazine violet. This should be interesting because it is yellow's opposite on the color wheel, so it should gray the yellow down. We'll see. These Turner paints are very, very vivid, so it's hard to say exactly what they're going to do. They are such brightly pigmented, vivid colors. Isn't that just beautiful? This is just could end up being just a wonderful piece of abstract art, just letting the colors flow into each other and mix. I'm just picking up these puddles off the side so things don't get too crazy here. And you see I'm not really making an effort to stay in the lines. Let's see, what other color should I do? Maybe something a little bit more natural. Let's do a little bit of raw sienna. Let's get some natural. There, we just created a little abstract art, and I think I'm going to call it Color Explosion. Lovely. Now I'll rinse my brush real good again. And let's play some more. We got one more square to work on a wet and wet wash. What shall we do this time? See, this is the problem with paper buckling. You get all these puddles, and even though I've worked really hard to try not to have puddles or too much water, I'm having trouble with fluid control with this paper. I said for stamping and card making, I think it's wonderful, but I think for in general watercolor painting, maybe not as much. So again, I'm going to just spray a little bit of water here and move it about. Let me rinse my brush a little better. There we go. And I'm going to move this water around. And you see I haven't changed brushes. That's because round brushes, particularly a nice large round brush, has a sharp point, so if I want to do a detailed bit of something I could. But if I wanted to cover a lot of area, this nice big brush will do that also. So there we go, we got everything wet and shiny with no puddles. And now I'm going to take a little ultramarine blue. This is another good way for playing with color theory by doing a wet and wet wash with different colors and seeing how they blend and flow together and what they look like together. But yeah, you can see how your colors work together if you get colors that mix together and get kind of muddy. that could be an effect you like, but it could be an effect you don't like and you don't want to happen. So after you've played with these colors like this, practicing all these different techniques, you'll know which colors you want to do to, work together to do different techniques, or to make different colors rather. I tell you, I just do not explain myself well. Okay, now I'm picking up a little alizarin crimson. I got a crazy hair here. Let me see if I can work it off to the... Again, I'm not necessarily trying to stay in the lines as much as just trying not to let these things get into each other. So those are two primaries, ultramarine blue and alizarin crimson. So let me get another primary. Let me get a lemon yellow, though we haven't played with that one yet. Now you see on these three, I didn't leave any white space. But in this one there is some white space, and that's another thing we're going to learn to play with too, is the white space, and see how it interacts with everything else. Because leaving white space is how you leave highlights in. And there's lots of ways to leave white space. You can either paint around them like we kind of did here, or you can use masking fluid, which we're going to play with also in this series, is another way to preserve white space in your paintings. So there we go. Wet and wet washes. To me, this is what watercolor is all about. You can absolutely get very precise with watercolor and have fine details and so forth. But to me, the beauty of watercolor, and what I'm trying so hard to embrace, is this. I have a bit of a, I am a right and left brain balance. So I lean a lot into logical, but I can also lean very heavily into creative. And I find that sometimes those things play nicely together, but sometimes they're at war a little bit. So the creative part of me wants to embrace this loose, fluid medium and just let it be what it's supposed to be, loose and flowy and painterly and beautiful. But then the logical side of me wants it to be precise and wants to force it into with stamping, especially, stamp an image and then and create a coloring effect that you end up with a Copic color, coloring situation, because everything is precise and blended one thing so easily into the next thing, and so forth and so on. And so I'm at war with myself internally, struggling between wanting tight control with my paints and wanting to embrace the loose painterly side of things. So I'm probably going to, not necessarily on camera, but I'm probably going to be playing a lot with wet and wet washes, just learning to embrace the natural flow of things. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed this quick little video, maybe not so quick, I really have no idea how long it is at this point, about wet and wet washes. And I hope you get encouraged to get out there, play with different paints, different brands, different papers, because like I said, with this Fabriano paper, whereas I can see that it's awesome for stamping because it's a nice smooth surface, I can see where it would be nice for doing that precise coloring with water paints on stamped images. But for loose painterly, really wet washes, I don't think it's quite so good. So now I know I need a different paper for that sort of thing to get results that I will be happy with at the end of the day. But anyway, thank you so much for watching. If you would like to help support Janine's Craft Room, there's going to be an iCard right about here. And if you feel so moved to click that link and help me to cover the products and the cost of bringing videos like this to you, I would appreciate a donation. But if that is not in the cards for you, then that is perfectly okay, because I am just so grateful that you showed up here today to view my video, to come along this journey with me. And for that, I am very, very grateful. But anyway, you guys have a very blessed day. Bye now.